They invited her because they thought she was empty. They whispered her name like a warning. The woman who couldn't give him children. To the Harrington family, Emily Carter wasn't just an ex-wife. She was a failure they were proud to outgrow. A cautionary tale served at country club luncheons. A punchline in pearls and privilege. So when Nathan Harrington announced his wedding to Lauren Whitmore, younger, connected, and born into the kind of East Coast money that doesn't need to be loud, his mother Margaret insisted Emily be invited. Front row humiliation. A living comparison. Proof that the Harrington bloodline had won. What they didn't know was that Emily hadn't been barren. She had been silent. For 5 years, she carried a truth that powerful families aren't trained to survive. One that doesn't scream, doesn't beg, and doesn't need permission to exist. The wedding invitation sat unopened on her kitchen counter in Austin, Texas, while 3 little boys played at her feet. Identical, sharp-eyed, impossibly calm for their age. They had their father's face and their mother's restraint. Emily didn't come to disrupt the wedding. She came because they wanted her to watch. So she did. She watched as chandeliers sparkled over the Newport estate. She watched as power strutted down Italian marble. She watched as arrogance dressed itself in white linen and string music. And then, calmly, without drama or explanation, she walked into their world holding the truth by the hand. By the time the music stopped, the marriage was already over. And the woman they invited to break walked away holding everything they were afraid to lose. This is the story of how silence became power, how patience became strategy, how 3 small boys in navy suits became the earthquake that shattered Boston's most arrogant dynasty. Because Emily Carter didn't need revenge. She just needed them to see what they threw away when they measured her worth in fertility reports and dinner party gossip. 5 years ago, when she left the Harrington estate with nothing but a suitcase and a shredded reputation, she made a choice. She would build a life so complete, so undeniable, that their cruelty would become irrelevant. She would raise her sons to be kind, brilliant, and unbothered by the legacy of a family that valued bloodlines over humanity. She would succeed not loudly, but absolutely. And when that ivory envelope arrived, stamped with gold lettering, dripping with condescension, she didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply smiled. Because Margaret Harrington had made one critical mistake. She assumed Emily still needed their world to matter. She didn't. But she was coming anyway. Not for closure. Not for vindication. But because sometimes, the people who tried to erase you deserve to see exactly what they failed to destroy. This is that moment. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Emily noticed it immediately, not because of the gold lettering or the thick ivory paper, but because of the return address. Harrington Estate, Newport, Rhode Island. The same address where she'd spent 3 years of her life feeling like a ghost in someone else's house. She set down her coffee and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside, embossed in script so elegant it looked like contempt made tangible. Mr. and Mrs. Nathan Harrington, request the honor of your presence. At the marriage of Nathan Charles Harrington, to Lauren Elizabeth Whitmore. Beneath it, tucked into the fold, was a handwritten note on Margaret Harrington's personal stationery. Emily, we thought it would be kind for you to see how well Nathan's life turned out. Do come if you're able. We've reserved a seat for you. With warm regards. Margaret. Emily read it twice. Then she laughed. A short, sharp sound that made her 3 sons look up from where they were building a Lego tower on the living room floor. Mama. The boy in the middle, Oliver, tilted his head. What's funny? She folded the note carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Nothing, sweetheart. Just old memories. But it wasn't funny. It was calculated. Margaret Harrington didn't do anything without strategy. This invitation wasn't kindness. It was a final insult. A reminder that Emily had been discarded, replaced, and forgotten. Except Margaret didn't know the truth. 5 years ago, when Emily left Boston, she hadn't been running from the Harringtons. She'd been protecting something they didn't deserve to know about. She was already pregnant, 10 weeks along, nauseous, exhausted, and terrified. Not with 1 child. With 3. The irony was almost poetic. For 2 years, Margaret had paraded fertility specialists through Emily's life like she was livestock at auction. Nathan had sat silent through every humiliating appointment, every invasive test, every dinner conversation where his mother lamented the genetic dead end Emily represented. And all the while, Emily's body had been preparing to give Nathan exactly what he claimed to want. But by the time she found out, she'd already made her decision. She wasn't staying. Not in a family that treated her like a failure. Not in a marriage where her husband's silence felt like endorsement of his mother's cruelty. So she left. Quietly. No lawyers. No demands. No forwarding address. She moved to Austin, Texas, far enough from Boston's social orbit that the Harringtons would never bother looking. She rented a small apartment near the University of Texas campus, enrolled in online coding courses, and taught herself to build software while her belly grew. By the time her sons were born, 3 perfect, screaming miracles delivered in a hospital where no one knew her maiden name, Emily had already launched the beta version of her logistics platform. She called it Catalyst Systems. Within 2 years, it had contracts with tech firms in Silicon Valley, manufacturing hubs in Chicago, and distribution networks across New York. She didn't sleep much. She didn't have time for friends. But she had her sons, her company, and a life built entirely on her own terms. The Harringtons never checked on her. Nathan never called. Margaret never wondered where she'd gone. To them, Emily Carter had simply ceased to exist. Until now. Emily walked to the window and looked out at the backyard, where her boys were starting to wrestle over a toy truck. They were 4 years old now, identical in every way except temperament. Oliver was cautious. Mason was bold. And Ethan, the youngest by 3 minutes, was the diplomat who kept the peace. They looked exactly like Nathan. Dark hair, sharp jawlines, the same intense focus when they were concentrating. Strangers sometimes asked if they were models. Other parents at daycare whispered about how striking they were. Emily never told them who their father was. She told them the truth in the simplest way she could. Your daddy wasn't ready to be a daddy. But I was ready to be your mama. And that's all that matters. It had been enough. For now. But this invitation changed things. Margaret wanted Emily to come to Newport and watch Nathan marry someone younger, richer, more fertile. She wanted Emily to feel small. Forgotten. Proof that the Harrington family had moved on to better things. Emily picked up her phone and texted her assistant. Clear my schedule for next Saturday. I need to be in Newport. Then she looked back at her sons and smiled. Because Margaret Harrington had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd invited the truth to her son's wedding. 5 years earlier, Emily had believed marriage was supposed to feel like partnership. She'd been wrong. The Harrington marriage felt like an audition she was perpetually failing. Every dinner party, every charity gala, every carefully orchestrated weekend at the Newport estate, Emily was being evaluated, measured, found wanting. It started small. Margaret's comments about Emily's posture, her choice of jewelry, the way she laughed too loud at Nathan's jokes. Darling, Margaret would say, her voice dripping with concern, you're not at a state school anymore. Composure matters. Emily had met Nathan at a tech conference in Boston. She'd been presenting research on supply chain optimization. He'd been there representing his family's investment portfolio. He'd approached her after her panel, charming and genuinely interested in her work. For 6 months, it had been perfect. He took her to bookstores in Cambridge, coffee shops in the North End, late-night walks along the Charles River. He told her about his family's expectations and how suffocating they felt. She told him about growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Cleveland, the daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse. He'd said he loved that about her. Her groundedness, her intelligence, the way she didn't care about old money or social hierarchies. But after the wedding, everything changed. Margaret took over. She hired a stylist to refine Emily's wardrobe. She introduced Emily to her social circle as Nathan's lovely wife, still finding her footing. She scheduled appointments with interior designers, etiquette coaches, and, eventually, fertility specialists. That's when the marriage truly unraveled. The first doctor's appointment was framed as routine. Just a checkup, Margaret had said. All Harrington women do this. It's about being proactive. But Emily knew what it really was. Margaret wanted proof that Emily could produce heirs. Preferably male. Preferably soon. The tests came back normal. Emily was perfectly healthy. But after a year of trying, there was still no pregnancy. Margaret's patience evaporated. Perhaps, she'd said over brunch at the country club, we should consider more aggressive options. There are excellent clinics in Manhattan. Emily had looked at Nathan, waiting for him to defend her, to tell his mother that their reproductive choices were private, that Emily wasn't a broodmare. He'd said nothing, just sipped his coffee and checked his phone. That silence became a pattern. Margaret would criticize. Nathan would stay quiet. Emily would go home feeling like she was disappearing. The final straw came at a family dinner 18 months into the marriage. Margaret had invited a cousin, a woman who'd just announced her second pregnancy, and spent the entire evening gushing about the blessing of motherhood while pointedly avoiding eye contact with Emily. Afterward, in their bedroom, Emily finally confronted Nathan. "Why don't you ever defend me?" He'd looked genuinely confused. "Defend you from what?" "From your mother. From the constant comments about my body, my choices, my worth." Nathan sighed. "She's just traditional. She doesn't mean anything by it. She called me barren at dinner, Nathan. To my face. She's worried about the family legacy. I'm your wife, not a legacy incubator." He'd turned away then, his voice cold. "You knew what you were marrying into." And there it was. The truth Emily had been avoiding. Nathan didn't see her as an equal. He saw her as an acquisition that wasn't performing as expected. She left 3 weeks later. Packed while he was at work. Left a note on the kitchen counter that said only, "I deserve better than silence." She didn't know she was pregnant yet. Wouldn't know for another month, when the nausea became unbearable and a clinic in Austin confirmed what she'd never expected. Triplets. 3 sons. The genetic legacy Margaret had demanded. And Emily would raise them alone, far from the family that had treated her like a failure. Because the Harringtons didn't deserve them. Austin, Texas welcomed Emily Carter like a city that didn't ask questions. She moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment near the University District, where the rent was affordable and the neighbors were mostly graduate students too busy with their own lives to care about hers. She enrolled in online coding courses and taught herself Python, JavaScript, and SQL while morning sickness turned her world sideways. By her second trimester, she'd built the prototype for Childless Systems, a logistics platform designed to streamline supply chain management for mid-sized companies. She pitched it to 3 investors while 7 months pregnant, wearing the only professional dress that still fit. 2 of them laughed her out of their offices. The third, a woman named Diane Shun who'd built her own tech company in the 90s, wrote her a check for $50,000. "I like your audacity," Diane had said. "And I like that you're not asking for permission to exist." Emily gave birth on a Tuesday morning in March at Dell Seton Medical Center. Oliver came first, screaming his arrival at 6:47 a.m. Mason followed 3 minutes later, quieter but alert. Ethan arrived last, at 6:53 a.m., with the kind of calm that would define his personality. The nurse who handed them to her, one by one, had smiled. "You've got your hands full, Mama." Emily had looked at their tiny faces, Nathan's features in triplicate, and felt something shift inside her. Not regret, not anger, just fierce, absolute certainty. These boys would never feel like they weren't enough. The first year was brutal. Emily worked from home, coding between feedings, taking client calls with babies strapped to her chest. She hired a part-time nanny named Rosa, a grandmother from El Paso who treated Emily's sons like her own grandchildren. Childless Systems grew slowly, then suddenly. A manufacturing company in Illinois signed a contract. Then a distribution network in New York. By the time the boys turned 2, Emily had 12 employees and an office in downtown Austin. She kept her maiden name, changed nothing on social media, lived a life so separate from Boston's elite circles that the Harringtons might as well have existed on another planet. Sometimes, late at night, she wondered if Nathan ever thought about her, if he ever felt guilty for his silence, if Margaret ever wondered where Emily had disappeared to. But mostly, Emily didn't think about them at all. She thought about code, about contracts, about the way Oliver liked his sandwiches cut into triangles and Mason refused to wear anything but superhero shirts. She thought about preschool enrollment and swim lessons and how to explain to 3-4-year-olds why they didn't have a daddy who came to parent-teacher conferences. She told them the truth, simply, "Your daddy wasn't ready. But I was. And you have me, and that's enough." It had been enough. Until the invitation arrived. Emily knew what Margaret was doing. She'd invited Emily to Newport to humiliate her, to parade Nathan's new bride, young, fertile, connected, as proof that Emily had been the problem all along. But Margaret didn't know about Oliver, Mason, and Ethan. Didn't know that Emily had spent 5 years building a life so complete that the Harrington family's approval had become irrelevant. Emily could ignore the invitation. She could throw it away and never think about Newport again. But she didn't want to. Not because she needed revenge. but because her sons deserved to know the truth. And because the Harringtons deserved to understand what they'd thrown away. She called Diane Shun. I need a favor. Name it. Can you watch 3-4-year-olds for a weekend? Diane laughed. This sounds dramatic. I'm in. Emily booked 4 plane tickets to Providence. She bought her sons new suits, navy blue, perfectly tailored. She packed carefully, methodically, with the same precision she used to write code. And on Friday morning, she loaded her boys into her car and drove to the airport. Where are we going, Mama? Oliver asked. To meet some people, Emily said. What people? Emily smiled. Family. Newport, Rhode Island looked exactly as Emily remembered. Old money wrapped in ocean views and architectural arrogance. The Harrington estate sat on 10 acres of manicured lawns overlooking Narragansett Bay, the kind of property that appeared in Architectural Digest spreads with captions like timeless elegance and generational wealth. Emily pulled up in her rental car, a practical SUV, nothing flashy, and parked near the back of the lot. Through the windshield, she could see the ceremony setup. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, a floral arch heavy with roses and hydrangeas, string quartet already playing soft classical music. Is this where Daddy lives? Mason asked from the back seat. Emily's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She'd told them they were meeting family. She hadn't told them whose. This is where some people I used to know live, she said carefully. But we're not staying. We're just visiting. Why? Because they invited us, Emily said. And sometimes it's important to show up. She got out and helped the boys from their car seats. They looked impossibly adorable in their navy suits. Oliver serious and observant. Mason already trying to loosen his tie. Ethan holding Emily's hand and watching everything with quiet intensity. A valet approached, looking confused. Are you with the wedding party? Guest, Emily said simply. She handed him the keys and led her sons toward the entrance. The estate's main lawn had been transformed into something from a luxury wedding magazine. White tents, crystal chandeliers hanging from trees, tables draped in silk, guests in designer suits and couture dresses mingling with champagne flutes. Emily spotted Margaret immediately. She was holding court near the bar, wearing an emerald green dress that probably cost more than Emily's first car. Nathan stood beside her in a sharp blue suit, looking older than Emily remembered. More tired. They hadn't seen her yet. Emily checked the seating chart displayed on an elegant easel near the entrance. She found her name quickly. Emily Carter, table 18. Table 18 was in the back, far from the ceremony, near the service entrance. A table for miscellaneous acquaintances, people invited out of obligation, not affection. Emily smiled. Of course Margaret would do this. Put her as far from the action as possible. Make sure everyone knew exactly where Emily ranked in the Harrington social hierarchy. Mama, Oliver tugged her hand. Why is that lady staring at us? Emily looked up. Margaret had spotted her. For a moment, Margaret's face went completely blank. Then her expression shifted through confusion, shock, and finally something that looked like dawning horror. Because Margaret wasn't looking at Emily. She was looking at the 3 boys standing beside her. 3 boys who looked exactly like photographs of Nathan at that age. Emily lifted her chin and smiled. Margaret's champagne flute slipped from her hand and shattered on the stone pathway. Guests turned. Nathan followed his mother's gaze. His face went white. Emily walked forward slowly, her son's hands in hers, crossing the manicured lawn like she owned it. She'd spent 5 years building a life powerful enough that she didn't need this family's approval. But watching Margaret's carefully constructed world start to crack, that felt like justice. Hello, Margaret, Emily said pleasantly when she reached them. Thank you for the invitation. I thought it would be rude not to come. Margaret couldn't speak. She was staring at the boys, her mouth opening and closing like she'd forgotten how language worked. Nathan found his voice first. Emily. His eyes were locked on Oliver, Mason, and Ethan. What? Who? These are my sons, Emily said calmly. Oliver, Mason, and Ethan. Boys, say hello. Hello. They chorused, polite and perfect. Nathan's face had gone from white to gray. Your sons. Yes. But you couldn't. I couldn't what, Nathan? Emily's voice was still pleasant. Conversational. But there was steel underneath. I couldn't have children? Is that what you were going to say? Margaret finally found her voice. It came out strangled. This is impossible. Is it? Emily tilted her head. Because I have birth certificates that say otherwise. Other guests were starting to notice. Conversations were stopping. People were turning to watch. How old are they? Nathan's voice was barely above a whisper. 4 years and 2 months. Emily watched the math click into place behind Nathan's eyes. 4 years. Which meant she'd been pregnant when she left. Which meant everything Margaret had said about Emily being barren, everything they'd used to justify discarding her, had been a lie. Or rather, Margaret had been the lie. You were pregnant, Nathan said. When you left. Yes. And you didn't tell me. Emily laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Tell you? Nathan, your mother called me a genetic dead end at dinner parties. You sat there and said nothing. Why would I tell you anything? I had a right to know. You had a right to treat me like a human being. Emily cut him off. You didn't. So I left. And I built a life without you. You can't just. I can't actually. And I did. Emily looked at Margaret, whose face had gone from shocked to calculating. Enjoy your wedding, Margaret. I hope Lauren knows what she's marrying into. Emily turned to leave. That's when the bride appeared. Lauren Whitmore stood frozen on the stone pathway in her wedding dress, a vision in white lace and silk. She was staring at Nathan, at Emily, at the 3 boys who were clearly, undeniably Nathan's children. Nathan. Her voice was small. What is she talking about? The music had stopped. 300 guests were watching, and the wedding hadn't even started yet. The silence that followed was the kind that felt physical. Lauren stood in her wedding dress, 20 feet from the altar, staring at the 3 boys who looked like miniature versions of her groom. Her bridesmaids clustered behind her, frozen in their blush-pink dresses, clutching bouquets like shields. Nathan, Lauren said again, her voice shaking. Who are they? Nathan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. It was Ethan, the youngest, who broke the silence. Mama, he said, tugging Emily's hand. Why is everyone looking at us? Emily knelt down to his level, her yellow dress pooling around her like liquid gold. Because sometimes, sweetheart, people don't expect the truth to show up. But that doesn't make it less true. She stood, gathering her composure like armor. The entire estate, every guest, every server, every musician, was watching. This was the moment Margaret had engineered. Emily's humiliation. Her public defeat. Except Emily wasn't the one who looked defeated. Margaret recovered first, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Emily, this is wildly inappropriate. Whatever game you're playing. Game? Emily's voice was calm, measured. Margaret, you invited me to watch your son marry someone else. You put me at table 18, in the back, near the kitchen, so I'd know exactly where I stood in your estimation. You wanted me to feel small. That's not. You wrote me a note. Emily continued, pulling the ivory card from her clutch. She read it aloud. We thought it would be kind for you to see how well Nathan's life turned out. She looked up. That's not kindness, Margaret. That's cruelty. So no, I'm not playing a game. I'm just responding to your invitation. Lauren's voice cracked. Nathan, answer me. Who are they? Nathan finally found words. I didn't know. Didn't know what? Lauren's dress rustled as she stepped forward, her face pale. That she was pregnant. When she left 5 years ago. I didn't. He looked at Emily, something desperate in his eyes. You didn't tell me. Why would I? Emily's voice was quieter now, but somehow that made it more devastating. You sat silent while your mother called me defective. You never defended me. Not once. And when I told you I deserved better than your silence, you said I knew what I was marrying into. She gestured to her sons, who stood close to her legs, watching everything with wide eyes. So yes, Nathan. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after I left. And I made a choice. I chose to raise them somewhere they'd never feel like they weren't enough. Somewhere no one would measure their worth by bloodlines and bank accounts. You had no right. I had every right, Emily said firmly. You gave up your rights when you chose your mother's comfort over your wife's dignity. Oliver, the cautious one, looked up at Emily. Mama, is that man our daddy? The question landed like a grenade. 300 guests leaned forward. Lauren's hand flew to her mouth. Margaret looked like she might faint. Nathan stared at the boy, at his own eyes, his own jawline, looking back at him from a face he'd never seen before. Nathan's voice broke. Yes, I am. Oh, Oliver considered this. Then, why don't you live with us? Nathan had no answer. Mason, bolder than his brothers, crossed his arms. Mama says you weren't ready to be a daddy. Were you scared? If the moment had been tense before, it was unbearable now. A 4-year-old had just asked the question every adult was thinking. Nathan looked at Emily. I would have, if I'd known, I would have. Would have what? Emily challenged. Stayed silent while your mother critiqued my parenting? Treated our children like dynasty insurance? Nathan, you had 3 years to show me who you were. You showed me. I believed you. Lauren's voice was barely audible. You have 3 sons. Yes. And you didn't tell him. No. For 5 years. Yes. Lauren looked at Nathan. Her eyes were filling with tears. Were you ever going to tell me you had a first wife? Nathan blinked. You knew I was divorced. You said it didn't work out. You said she couldn't have children. You said, Lauren's voice rose, cracking. You said she was the reason. That she was broken. I never said. Your mother did. At the engagement dinner. She told me I was the fresh start Nathan deserved. She said your first marriage failed because your wife was infertile. Lauren's hand was shaking. And you sat there. You didn't correct her. The silence again. Heavier this time. Because Lauren had just realized what Emily knew 5 years ago. Nathan's greatest talent was silence. His cruelty wasn't active. It was passive. It was the things he didn't say, the moments he didn't defend, the truths he let others bury. Lauren looked at Emily, then at the 3 boys, then back at Nathan. I can't do this, she whispered. Lauren. She gathered her dress and walked away. Not toward the altar, toward the house. Her bridesmaids scrambled after her. The guests erupted into whispers. And Margaret Harrington, for the first time in her life, had absolutely no control over the narrative. Emily knelt down and hugged her sons. Come on, boys. Let's go. Are we leaving? Ethan asked. Yes, sweetheart. But we just got here. Emily smiled sadly. Sometimes, showing up is enough. She stood, took their hands, and walked back toward the parking lot. Behind her, the Harrington wedding collapsed into chaos. And Emily Carter walked away without looking back. By Sunday morning, the Harrington wedding had become national news. Emily saw the headlines while feeding the boys breakfast in their Austin kitchen. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Unknown numbers, texts from old acquaintances she hadn't spoken to in years, even a voicemail from a producer at Good Morning America asking if she'd consider an interview. She ignored all of it. Boston Air's secret children crash society wedding. Boston Globe. Bride flees altar after groom's hidden triplets revealed. New York Post. The wedding that broke the internet. Inside the Harrington family scandal. Vanity Fair. Someone had filmed the entire confrontation. Of course they had. In an age where everyone had a phone, privacy at a society wedding was a myth. The video had gone viral. 12 million views in 24 hours. Emily watched it once, clinically, while the boys played in the living room. There she was in her yellow dress, her sons beside her, facing down Nathan and Margaret with perfect composure. There was Lauren in her wedding gown, asking the question that unraveled everything. There was Nathan, silent as always, while his world collapsed. The comments section was brutal. She's a queen. Showed up and destroyed them without raising her voice. Those boys are literally Nathan clones. How did he not know? Margaret Harrington called her barren for years. The karma is chef's kiss. Lauren dodged a bullet. Imagine marrying into that family. Emily closed the video and put her phone face down on the counter. Mama. Oliver appeared at her elbow. Are you sad? No, baby. Just thinking. About the man who's our daddy? Emily pulled him close. A little bit. He seemed sad. Yes, he did. Is he going to come visit us? That was the question Emily had been dreading. Because the answer was inevitable. Nathan wouldn't let this go. The Harringtons didn't accept defeat. They litigated it. Sure enough, the email arrived Monday morning. From Nathan.Harrington@harringtoncapital.com. Subject, we need to talk. Emily, I know you don't want to hear from me, but we need to discuss the boys. They're my sons. I have rights. My lawyers will be in touch, but I'm asking you. Please, let's handle this like adults. Nathan. Emily read it twice. Then she forwarded it to the attorney she'd put on retainer 3 years ago, when Catalyst Systems started making real money. A woman named Patricia Vance who specialized in family law and had a reputation for eating corporate lawyers for breakfast. Patricia called within an hour. So, she said, the Harringtons. Yes. You know they're going to come at you hard. I know. They have resources. Old money. Political connections. I know, Emily repeated. But I have something they don't. What's that? 5 years of documentation proving I'm their only parent. Birth certificates with no father listed. School records. Medical records. 5 years of Nathan having zero involvement or interest. And I have the video of him sitting silent while his mother called me barren. Patricia laughed. I like you. Let's burn them down. The lawsuit arrived Wednesday. Nathan wasn't asking for joint custody. He was asking for full custody, claiming Emily had deprived him of his parental rights through deception and alienation, claiming the boys deserved to know their father, claiming Emily was unstable and had demonstrated poor judgment by hiding his children from him. Margaret had signed on as a co-plaintiff. Of course she had. Emily read the lawsuit in her office while her sons were at preschool. She read it carefully, methodically, the way she'd learned to read code, looking for the logic errors, the weak points. There were many. Patricia called. They're trying to intimidate you. They think you'll fold because they're rich and connected. They're wrong. Good. Because this is going to get ugly. They'll hire investigators. They'll dig into your finances, your past, your parenting. They'll try to paint you as vindictive. Emily thought about 5 years of bedtime stories. 5 years of scraped knees and nightmare hugs. 5 years of building a software company while raising 3 boys alone. Let them try, she said. The investigation started immediately. Private detectives showed up at her son's preschool, asking questions about Emily's parenting. They contacted her employees, her neighbors, her assistant. Emily's lawyer anticipated every move. They want to prove you're an unfit mother, Patricia said. So we're going to prove you're an exceptional one. They compiled evidence. Awards from Emily's company. Testimonials from employees about her leadership. Photos of her with the boys at parks, museums, libraries. Medical records showing perfect health checkups. Preschool reports praising her son's emotional intelligence. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Lauren Whitmore. The bride who'd fled the altar called Emily's lawyer directly. I'm willing to testify, she said, about what Margaret told me, about how Nathan let his mother lie, about what they're really like. Patricia recorded every word. By Friday, public opinion had turned completely against the Harringtons. The video had been dissected on every talk show. Legal analysts weighed in on Nathan's abandonment by ignorance. Parenting experts questioned why a man who'd shown zero interest in his ex-wife would suddenly demand full custody. The answer was obvious. Control. The Harringtons didn't want the boys because they loved them. They wanted them because Emily's independence was intolerable. Emily's phone rang late Friday night. Unknown number. She answered. Hello. Emily. Nathan's voice. He sounded exhausted. Can we talk? Just us. No lawyers. Why? Because. He paused. Because I was wrong. About everything. And I want to fix it. Emily looked at her sons, asleep in their beds down the hall. You can't, she said quietly. You can't fix 5 years, Nathan. You can't fix the silence. You can't undo what you let your mother do to me. I know. But they're my sons. They're my sons, Emily corrected. You're just the DNA. And if you actually cared about them, about what's best for them, you'd drop the lawsuit and leave us alone. She hung up. Then she called Patricia. File a countersuit. Full documentation of his abandonment. I want sole custody legally recognized. You'll get it, Patricia said. And Emily believed her. The Harringtons fought back with everything they had. Within a week, Nathan's legal team had filed motions in 3 different courts, trying to establish jurisdiction in Massachusetts rather than Texas. They hired a child psychologist who'd never met the boys to claim they were being alienated from their paternal heritage. They leaked stories to friendly society columnists about Emily's calculated deception. Margaret gave an interview to the Boston Herald. We're heartbroken, she said, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Those boys are Harringtons. They belong with family, not with someone who deliberately hid them out of spite. Emily watched the interview with Patricia in her lawyer's Boston office. They'd flown in for depositions. She's good, Patricia admitted, playing the wounded grandmother. She called me barren for 2 years, Emily said flatly. On camera. We have witnesses. I know. But she's betting on sympathy. Rich families are good at that. The battle moved to discovery. Nathan's lawyers subpoenaed Emily's financial records, trying to prove she couldn't provide the lifestyle Harrington children deserved. They found Emily's company instead, profitable, growing, with annual revenues approaching $8 million. They tried a different angle, Emily's parenting. They deposed Rosa, the nanny. They questioned preschool teachers. They reviewed every pediatrician visit, looking for missed appointments or medical neglect. They found nothing, because Emily had been meticulous. 5 years of single parenthood had taught her to document everything. She sat in the witness chair in a charcoal suit, composed and clear-eyed. Nathan's lawyer tried to rattle her, but Emily had spent 5 years building a company. She knew how to handle hostile negotiations. "Ms. Carter, isn't it true you deliberately concealed your pregnancy to deprive my client of his children?" "No," Emily said calmly. "I left because your client and his family treated me like a failed investment. I discovered I was pregnant 3 weeks later. By then, I'd already decided my children deserved better than a family that measured worth in bloodlines." "So you admit you denied him his rights?" "I protected my children from emotional abuse," Emily corrected. "There's a difference. You don't think children deserve to know their father?" Emily looked directly at Nathan. "I think children deserve a father who shows up, who defends them, who loves them more than his family's reputation. Your client had 3 years to be that person in our marriage. He chose silence instead." Nathan looked away. The judge called a recess. In the hallway, Nathan approached Emily. His lawyers tried to stop him, but he waved them off. "Emily, please." She turned, exhausted. "What, Nathan? Can we just talk? Without lawyers?" Emily studied him. He looked older, worn down, maybe genuinely remorseful. "You want to talk?" she said quietly. "Fine. Tell me. When you sat silent while your mother called me defective, what were you thinking?" He swallowed. "I don't know. I thought if I ignored it, it would stop. It didn't stop. It got worse. And you kept ignoring it. I was wrong. I know that now." "Now," Emily repeated. 5 years later. After I built a whole life without you. Now you know." Nathan's jaw tightened. "I didn't know about the boys." "You didn't ask," Emily said. "That's the point, Nathan. You didn't ask where I went. You didn't ask if I was okay. You just moved on. So yes, when I found out I was pregnant, I made a choice. I chose to protect them from becoming another thing your mother could criticize. They're my sons. Biologically, yes. In every other way, no." Emily's voice was firm but not cruel. "You're not on their birth certificates. You've never changed a diaper or read a bedtime story. You don't know that Oliver hates loud noises, or that Mason sleeps with a stuffed elephant, or that Ethan asks questions about everything." Nathan's eyes glistened. "I could learn. Maybe," Emily said. "But not like this. Not through lawsuits and intimidation. If you actually want to know your sons, you'll drop the custody case and ask, respectfully, for visitation. You'll apologize for what your mother did. And you'll accept that I'm their parent. Full stop. My lawyers say." "I don't care what your lawyers say." Emily cut him off. "This isn't about winning. This is about 3 little boys who deserve stability. Choose them, Nathan. For once in your life, choose what's right over what your mother wants." She walked away. Nathan stood alone in the courthouse hallway, and for the first time, he looked like a man who understood what he'd lost. The settlement conference was scheduled for a Thursday morning in a conference room overlooking downtown Boston. Nathan arrived with 2 lawyers. Margaret came separately, her face tight with barely controlled fury. Emily brought Patricia and a leather folder full of documentation. The mediator, a tired-looking woman named Judge Reeves, opened the session. "We're here to discuss custody arrangements for Oliver, Mason, and Ethan Carter." "Harrington," Margaret interrupted. "The boy's legal name should be Harrington." Judge Reeves didn't even glance at her. "The boy's legal name, as listed on their birth certificates, is Carter. Ms. Carter chose not to list a father. Legally, that means Mr. Harrington has no automatic parental rights." Nathan flinched. Margaret's jaw tightened. "However," Judge Reeves continued, "Mr. Harrington is requesting recognition as the biological father and is seeking joint custody. Ms. Carter, what is your position?" Patricia opened her folder. "Ms. Carter is willing to consider limited, supervised visitation contingent on several conditions. First, Mr. Harrington must complete a parenting course. Second, he must undergo family therapy to understand the harm caused by his passive participation in his mother's emotional abuse. Third, Mrs. Margaret Harrington must have 0 contact with the children until such time as she issues a public apology to Ms. Carter." Margaret stood up. "Absolutely not." "Sit down, Mrs. Harrington," Judge Reeves said sharply. You're not a party to this case. You're here as a courtesy. Those are my grandchildren. Those are Ms. Carter's children, the judge corrected. Children you publicly humiliated her for not having. I've read the depositions, Mrs. Harrington. You don't have a legal leg to stand on. Margaret sat, seething. Nathan's lead lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, our client is willing to negotiate, but sole custody with supervised visitation seems extreme. Does it? Patricia slid a document across the table. This is a timeline. 5 years where your client made zero attempt to contact Ms. Carter. Zero inquiries about her welfare. Zero interest in whether she might need support. She slid another document. This is the video deposition of Lauren Whitmore, in which she testifies that your client allowed his mother to lie about Ms. Carter's infertility rather than correct the record. Another document. This is testimony from 3 former household employees describing Mrs. Harrington's treatment of Ms. Carter during their marriage. Another. And this is a financial analysis showing that Ms. Carter has built a successful company while single-handedly raising 3 children. She doesn't need Harrington money. She doesn't need Harrington connections. What she needs is for your clients to stop trying to control a woman who outgrew them. The room fell silent. Judge Reeves studied the documents. Mr. Harrington, let me be clear. You have no legal standing to demand custody. Ms. Carter could walk away from this table, and you'd have nothing. She's offering you a chance to know your sons. I suggest you take it. Nathan looked at Emily. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time in 7 years. What do you want, Emily? Emily met his gaze. I want you to understand something. Those boys don't need a Harrington legacy. They don't need trust funds or society connections or whatever else your mother thinks defines worth. They need a father who shows up, who's kind, who listens, who defends them. I can be that. Then prove it, Emily said. Take the parenting class. Do the therapy. Show me, not through lawyers, through action, that you're capable of putting them first. Nathan looked at Margaret, then back at Emily. Something shifted in his expression. Okay, he said quietly. I'll do it. Margaret exploded. Nathan, you can't just. Mother. Nathan's voice was firm in a way Emily had never heard. Enough. Margaret blinked. You were wrong, Nathan continued. About Emily. About everything. And I was wrong for not stopping you. But I'm stopping you now. If I want to know my sons, I have to earn it. And I can't do that with you undermining everything. I was protecting this family. You were protecting your pride, Nathan said. There's a difference. For the first time in Emily's memory, Margaret Harrington had nothing to say. Judge Reeves drafted the agreement on the spot. Limited visitation, supervised by a court-appointed monitor, starting with 1 hour per week. Nathan would complete parenting courses. Therapy would be mandatory. Margaret would have no contact until Emily decided otherwise. Sign here, Judge Reeves said. Nathan signed without hesitation. Margaret stood up and walked out without a word. After the lawyers left, Nathan lingered. Emily. She waited. Thank you, he said. For giving me a chance. I don't deserve it. No, Emily agreed. You don't. But my sons deserve to make their own decision about their father. When they're ready. Can I ask you something? What? Why did you come to the wedding? Nathan's voice was genuinely curious. You could have ignored the invitation. You could have stayed in Texas and never looked back. Why show up? Emily considered the question. Because your mother wanted me to feel small. And I wanted her to see that she failed. But mostly, she looked at him directly. Because I wanted my sons to see me stand up for myself. To see that you don't run from cruelty, you face it. With dignity. Nathan nodded slowly. They're lucky. To have you. I know, Emily said. Then, softer. Maybe someday, they'll feel lucky to have you too. But you'll have to earn that. I will, Nathan said. I promise. Emily picked up her bag. Then I'll see you at the first supervised visit. Be on time, Nathan. Those boys hate waiting. She walked out of the conference room, leaving Nathan standing alone with the signed agreement and the weight of 5 years of mistakes. 6 months later, Emily sat in Zilker Park in Austin, watching her sons play on the climbing structure. Nathan was with them, his third unsupervised visit. The court monitor had signed off 2 weeks ago, satisfied that Nathan was following through on his commitments. He'd completed the parenting course. He'd done the therapy. He called once a week to say goodnight, even when he was traveling. He wasn't perfect. He still called at inconvenient times. He still occasionally deferred to Margaret's opinions before catching himself. But he was trying, genuinely trying. Oliver ran over, breathless. Mama. Did you see me on the monkey bars? I did, baby. You were so brave. Dad helped me reach. Emily smiled. That was nice of him. It was the first time Oliver had called Nathan Dad, without prompting. Emily noticed Nathan notice it from across the playground. His face softened. Mason appeared next, dragging Nathan by the hand. Mom, Dad says he's never been to Austin's Bat Bridge. Can we show him? That's up to you guys, Emily said. If you want to. We want to. Ethan called from the swings. Nathan approached, uncertain. Is that okay? I don't want to intrude on your routine. It's fine, Emily said. But I'm not coming. This is your time with them. Nathan hesitated. Do they know the way? They're 4, Nathan. You'll figure it out together. She watched them walk toward the bridge. 3 small boys in matching dinosaur shirts, holding hands with a father who was learning, slowly, how to be present. Emily's phone buzzed. A text from Diane Shun. Board meeting went well. Chicago expansion approved. You're killing it, CEO. Emily smiled. Catalyst Systems had grown faster than she'd imagined. They'd just opened a second office. Emily had been featured in Forbes under 30. Investors were calling weekly. The Harrington scandal had faded from headlines, replaced by newer dramas. Margaret had retreated from public life. Lauren Whitmore had married someone else, a quiet ceremony in Vermont, with no society press. And Emily? Emily had built exactly what she'd set out to build. A life so complete that the Harrington family's approval, or disapproval, was irrelevant. Her phone buzzed again. This time, Margaret's name appeared. Emily considered ignoring it. Then she answered. Hello, Margaret. There was a long pause. Then, I'm calling to apologize. Emily waited. I was wrong. Margaret continued, her voice tight. About you. About what I said. About. She trailed off. I spent 5 years believing you were the problem. And I spent the last 6 months in therapy realizing I was. Okay, Emily said neutrally. I'd like to meet my grandsons. If you'll allow it. Emily watched Nathan and the boys at the bridge, pointing at the sky, waiting for the bats. Not yet. Please, Emily. I know I don't deserve. No. Emily interrupted. You don't. And my sons don't need a grandmother who might revert to cruelty the moment they disappoint you. I wouldn't. You did, Emily said firmly. For 2 years. You made me feel like my worth was measured in fertility reports. And when it turned out you were wrong, you didn't apologize. You sued for custody. Margaret was silent. If you want to know my sons, Emily continued, you'll do what Nathan did. Therapy. Real work on yourself. And when I'm convinced you won't damage them the way you damaged me, I'll consider it. But that's my decision, not yours. I understand, Margaret said quietly. Good. Emily hung up. She didn't feel angry. She didn't feel vindicated. She just felt clear. 5 years ago, she'd left the Harringtons because she refused to shrink herself to fit their expectations. And now, they were the ones asking for space in her life. The power had flipped completely. Nathan and the boys returned at sunset, covered in ice cream and talking over each other about the bats. Mama, there were thousands of them. Mason exclaimed. And they flew like this. Ethan spread his arms and swooped around the grass. Oliver climbed into Emily's lap. Dad bought us ice cream, even though it's close to dinner. Emily looked at Nathan. Did he? Nathan shrugged, sheepish. I'm still learning the rules. Ice cream before dinner is a sometimes rule, Emily said. Not a never rule. Noted. The boys ran off to the swings one last time before heading home. Nathan sat down on the bench beside Emily. Thank you, he said. For today. For all of this. You're their father, Emily said simply. They deserve to know you. As long as you keep showing up. I will. They sat in comfortable silence, watching 3 boys who carried both their genetics and Emily's resilience. Can I ask you something? Nathan said. What? Do you ever regret coming to the wedding? It would have been easier to just stay away. Emily considered it. No, I don't regret it. Because my sons needed to see me stand up for myself. And you needed to see what you'd walked away from. I'm sorry, Nathan said. For all of it. For the silence. For letting my mother. I know, Emily said. But sorry doesn't erase 5 years. It just means you're trying to do better now. That's enough. Nathan nodded. They sat together, not as former spouses, not as enemies, but as 2 people learning to co-parent across the wreckage of who they used to be. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Emily stood in their doorway, watching them breathe. 3 perfect humans. 3 lives she'd built from nothing but love and determination. They didn't need the Harrington name. They didn't need society connections or trust funds or legacy. They had her, and that had always been enough. Emily closed the door softly and walked to her home office. Her company wouldn't run itself. She had contracts to review, investors to call, an empire to build. Because the woman the Harringtons invited to break, she'd done something better than break. She'd rebuilt. The end.